All right, I think we will get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on our 5-day virtual conference Donor Experience Week. I hope you have learned a lot thus far. My name is Mel Bilko. I'm Kila's Head of Community Engagement, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We also have Sam in the background as usual, helping us out with any technical questions, so please feel free to give her a little wave. Before we begin, I wanted to start by acknowledging that here in Vancouver, we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and give thanks for their generosity and hospitality on these lands and waters that we are on. We're super excited to dive into this topic with Brock today on his session titled Design Thinking for Fundraisers, why this skill is essential and how to implement it. For those of you who don't know what design thinking is, I'm right there with you, to be honest. So hopefully after this session, you'll gain some new insights, have a better understanding of what it is, and how to actually incorporate it into your fundraising programs. So feel free to ask questions in the Q&A or the chat box throughout the presentation. Please do remember that if you're in the chat, please select all panelists and attendees if you'd like everyone to see your question. We will try to get to them throughout, but most likely we'll just have a Q&A session at the end. All right, I think that is all the housekeeping I had to get to. I know you've all heard me do that spiel before, so my apologies, but this is the last time because this is the last session of our 5-day conference. So with that, I'd like to give a very warm and special welcome to Brock. And Brock, I will let you take it from here to close off the Donor Experience Week.
Thank you. Let me just load up my slides. It'll take 1 second. Bear with me. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. This is a first for me, speaking at Donor Experience Week, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you some things that I'm pretty passionate about. Can I get a thumbs up, maybe, Mel or Sam, if you're seeing my slides? All right, okay. Thanks, Sam. Okay, let's jump into this. So today we're going to be talking about design thinking for fundraisers. Now, design thinking is not a brand new concept. The for-profit sector, the agency world, the tech world, the design world, they've been using it to great effect. You've definitely been benefiting from it, whether you realize it or not. If you've got an iPhone or one of those nice new Pixel Google phones in your pocket or sitting in front of you, then I think you know the power of great design and how it can just seep its way into your life. And there has been, I believe, the nonprofit sector has not been quick to adopt it, but I do think that there are some really interesting ways that you can bring it into your program and into your fundraising. I certainly have, and I'm looking forward to sharing all that with you. So just a little bit about me. This is me right here. I've been a fundraiser for about 13 years now. I'm a CFRE. Currently, I am freelancing, but I did spend the bulk of my career at a charity called War Child Canada, where I got to travel all over the world, meeting donors, seeing programming. It was incredible. Before that, I was in direct marketing at an agency called Stephen Thomas Limited, where I got to work on some incredible clients, from universities to hospitals to international aid. I worked on a few Olympic Games, which was a blast. And most recently, I was in mental health. But at the moment, I'm freelancing, I'm helping charities, and I wrote a book, which I'm incredibly proud of. You can download a free chapter right here if you'd like. The book is called Digital Fundraising for Nonprofits from the Ground Up. It's a book that I wrote based on several years now of teaching at Humber College in Toronto. I teach a course on digital fundraising in the postgraduate fundraising program, where the course is going to be reworked a little bit to become more of an integrated fundraising program. And I thought that there was a great opportunity to just share the years and years of effort that I've put into this book to share it with the world. And if Holly Paulin is on, you should wave, Holly. You should say hello in the chat, because my good friend Holly Paulin at Good Works edited this book, and it wouldn't be possible without her. So enough of the plug. I've got a quick icebreaker. I really don't want to take more than 30 seconds here. Very important. Don't hit enter yet. But what I do want you to type into the chat box where you keep your ketchup. Could be the cupboard, could be the fridge. Maybe you're just anti-ketchup. That's acceptable. Don't have ketchup. I get it. Fridge. All right, you're hitting enter. Okay, go ahead, hit enter. Look at this. Fridge, 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 fridge. It's very, very North American. Okay. Any cupboards? One in the fridge and one in the pantry. Julie's making up for some other people's anti-ketchup. Okay. If we have 5 minutes to kill at the end, we could talk more about this. But thanks. All right. Yeah, it's a very Canadian thing. Lori, you're right. Okay. Here we go. Today, what we are going to cover today is we are going to try to talk about design thinking for fundraisers. For fundraisers is an important piece of that. I'm really going to make every effort I can to bring this back to the needs that you have in your shop if you're responsible in any way, directly or indirectly, for raising money for a good cause. There is a ton of great resources. There's an entire slide at the end of this in the presentation and in the downloadable version of the presentation. There is a ton of great resources out there about design thinking, but there are very few resources that directly tie the design thinking methodology and the benefits and the process to fundraising. Mel Bilko, I'll cover it in the, because you're intrigued, I'm gonna cover ketchup in the end. We're going to talk about why we're here. We're going to talk about design thinking for fundraising and why it's important. What is it? We're going to talk about how you can use it. And then we're going to try and loop this into how we might use design thinking with an equity lens. There's some really interesting opportunities there. And I think that with a slight tweak on the traditional design thinking methodology, we really can use it as a valuable tool to increase equity and equality and inclusion within our organizations and within our tactics and our programs and our strategies. I've included a case study here of how I have actually put design thinking to use within a charity when I worked at War Child Canada. And I'm gonna make every effort to have the 10 minutes allotted available for Q&A. Even if it might be my voice, I might be a sweaty mess by the end of it, but hang in there with me, guys. We'll do this together. Okay, why are we here? This is our big why are we here. So much of our fundraising, it comes from traditional tactics, which are informed by best practice. You very well may say this word best practice 15 times a day. If you're in any kind of an agency or consulting role, you probably do. I hear this word all the time. Certainly this week, you will have heard best practice. I, 5, 6, 7 years ago, started to wonder, best practice for who, guys? Best practice when? Under what conditions? Where are these best practices coming from? And I also simultaneously began to think that almost anything we do as fundraisers could probably sit somewhere in this bell curve or in any bell curve. There are some things like your charity's current donors. There are probably some people who on one side of the spectrum, one outlier would be they only give to your charity. That's it, they love you so much. And then there are going to be people who give to absolutely every direct mail appeal that shows up in their mailbox. But for the most part, there are probably going to be people who give to 3, 4, 5, 6. There are going to be donors in your file, they are no doubt donors, who when that appeal comes in, they give as little as possible. They kind of reluctantly give a small amount of money just so that they can feel like they did, or just so that they don't miss out on maybe some very specific benefit. There's going to be people on the very other side of the spectrum who give until it absolutely hurts. But for the most part, of the people that donate, they give, they respond. There are going to be donors who, when you hit send on an email, they ignore, and it goes away. It's archived, it's deleted. There's going to be people who absorb that information like a sponge, and they retain it for years to come so that they can repeat it back to friends and family. But for the most part, most of the people in the middle of the bell curve, they are just listening. They open it, they skim it, maybe they do it, maybe they don't. What I'm building towards here is that in the middle of this bell curve, this is the stuff we get, right? This is the stuff generally I think we understand. And this is also this is where benchmarks live. This is where response rates live. This is where test results live. This is the type of stuff that gets presented at conferences, at Donor Experience Week, for example. This is the stuff we understand. But outside on those edges, that's where the weird stuff lives. That's where the scary stuff lives, because that's the stuff that we don't understand it. It's the stuff that is outside best practice. It's outside conventional wisdom. And it's going to be the stuff that is outside of the public domain. It's going to be the stuff that is very proprietary to your cause. It's going to be very, very personal to your cause and to your charity. Because all that stuff in the middle is essentially public domain. Public domain, at least within the box of fundraising and fundraising conferences. You know, this is where we learn from what other charities have done, we replicate it, and hopefully we see the same results. And if we did, hopefully that is an improvement on the response rates we might have seen before, and hopefully it came in under budget than how we did things before. But the public domain, this middle area, this is where essentially the status quo lives. And design thinking, and what I hope we cover today, or I hope what you take away today from what we cover, is how to find and better understand those proprietary insights, those personal insights. Because what we want to do is we want to fish in those deep waters, and we want to push it into the middle, because there is probably some really cool stuff in there. And chances are, if you're the type of person or the type of charity who is feeling any kind of pressure or any kind of expectation to have an idea or a project or a program or a campaign or an appeal that is beyond or is different, or that is going to break through, that's going to be more than incremental status quo maintenance, then you're going to have to fish in those uncertain waters. You're going to have to go out into the deep waters to find the weird stuff and bring it back and make it normal. You're going to have to go to the margins. And so to sum that up into essentially two sentences is that if we ignore those outliers, if we ignore that really interesting, juicy stuff on the outside, then how big is our blind spot? Am I right? What are we missing if all we're looking at is what is known and what is understood? You have to look at the other side of that coin and wonder, what are we missing? So that is why we're here today. Now tell me, you could do it in the chat if you'd like. I'm watching it. I got the chat open, no pressure. But does this sound familiar? You find a best practice, whether it's a white paper or a presentation. I'm doing it right now. You're going to go back to your office and you're going to say, Brock told me this. You're going to find best practice. You're going to replicate it. You're going to adapt it. You're essentially going to take what worked for someone else and you're going to slap your branding on it. You're going to make sure it suits your brand standards and your voice. You're going to do it. You're going to execute it. And then you're going to measure it against the benchmarks of the thing that you replicated and adapted. I imagine that may sound familiar. That may sound somewhat familiar. I've been here. I've done it. You do it, and then you move on. That's your campaign. That's your appeal. That's your Giving Tuesday. That's your Christmas appeal. There's a video here that is not going to work. We tested it before because I'm doing this too clever by half video sharing thing where I'm floating. The video is not going to work, but don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. And Sam has the link, I believe, to share it. So if you're curious, you don't have to do it now, but if you watch it after, I think you'll enjoy it. It's about a 5-minute video talking about Norman doors. And the short version is that a Norman door is a door that you think you should be pulling because there's a handle on it. Things you pull handles, right? But actually you need to push it. It does the opposite of what you think it's going to do, and how that's just a terrible design feature. Now you're going to see them everywhere. And please, when you yank on a door that doesn't open because it's supposed to be pushed when it's got a handle on it, now you know what it is. So it's called a Norman door. It's called a Norman door because there's a man named Don Norman, just a nice old fellow, and he invented, or he has articulated and clarified the design thinking methodology, which is this circular thing we're going to spend the next 40 minutes talking about, where along the way in design thinking, what we do is we observe things, we observe people yanking on a handle. We generate ideas. They're like, oh, geez, if everyone's yanking on this handle, maybe the handle's the problem. The person's not the problem. Maybe it should be a panel, and we should push on it. That would solve it. So, all right, let's prototype that. Let's go downstairs and just unbolt a handle, and let's put up a little sign that says push and see if people push on it. And then if that didn't work, then you try something else, and you try something else, and you go around and around and you do it. So now I hope what you're seeing here is that we have two quite different practices that, you might get to similar outcomes along the way, but one is a fairly linear and has kind of a finish line that we work towards, which is the traditional path. And then we have design thinking, which is meant to be more iterative, circular, where it never really ends. It should never end if you're doing it well. Now, what is design thinking? Let's get a definition out of the way. If you look at the word design on its own, we're creating and we're refining a product, a service, a process, you name it. Thinking, to just sort of maybe put a name to the obvious, thinking is about generating insights through observation, where we're firing connections in our brain and we're starting to generate ideas and knowledge and thoughts about what we're seeing. And if we start to smash these together within this process that we want to live, we are essentially just trying to improve human experience, or maybe better put for our context is donor experience. We're trying to improve the donor experience. So design thinking is generating insights to create something that improves human experience or your donor experience. And so why might we do that? We might be able to use design thinking to capture the mindsets and the needs of your donors, as opposed to simply a binary, what do they do and what do they not do? They give or they don't give. Design thinking might open up a door and an opportunity for us to ask why and receive a deeper answer to it. We can reduce risk and some costs associated with launching new ideas. Design thinking done well and design thinking done appropriately means quick, dirty, small prototypes that are going to give us insights and inspiration and data, so that when we are pretty sure we got the right thing, boom, we build it out and we grow, as opposed to this might sound familiar to some of you, spending a lot of money up front to hire a person or a place to maybe do something later down the line, to do something that might work down the line. If you've ever put 50% down on a consultant fee, then you probably know what I'm talking about. We can learn faster, and we can try to identify some new needs-based opportunities. We're going to have a few examples of this come up throughout, but needs-based and new are the key words there. Okay, we have talked about why, we've talked about what, and so now we're gonna move on to the how. Design thinking 101. I've hinted to this a couple times. You can take a master's and a PhD and check 75 books out of the library on design thinking And if this is an interesting thing to you, maybe you should do it. But I am trying to condense here. I'm doing my absolute best to condense all of that into what I hope is a practical, functional 30-minute crash course at most. Here's the circle. I've talked about circles a few times. I've waved my arms a few times. There's never really a start to a circle. That's why it's a circle, right? But if we were going to start somewhere, observation. Ideally, we are observing some sort of behavior. Maybe we create the context for that observation, which might look like hosting a focus group or a very engaging, interactive survey. But ideally, we either create this, whether we create the circumstances or we see something in the wild, we are observing a behavior of some kind. And that is going to spur on the idea generation phase, which could just look like the idea that pops into your head when you're having a bath or you're doing the dishes. For me, it's sometimes putting away the dishes or going for a walk. But this could also be as big as like a 3-day idea generation sprint as a retreat with boards. You know, there's the either is right. Prototyping. This is as small as arts and crafts time. You popsicle stick and scotch tape something together, or this is maybe whiteboarding, but this is when you start to take the ideas that you just generated and you start to whip them up and try to get to a point where it's a tactile thing that people can touch and look at, and you can watch what they do with it, how they react, what their thoughts are. Which then leads to testing. Now, you probably know there is no you're done. There is no this is you're live. You just test, and then you observe the test, and then you generate ideas, then you prototype, then you test, then you observe it. And so there is no live. There is just going around this circle. And testing is probably going to be the closest thing to going live, because that's where you're probably going to actually release it out to the wild, what you think is the most thoughtful, fulsome approach to the problem that you observed at the start. Now, in this right half, the observation and idea generation phase, essentially what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to make sure that we are designing the right thing, that we are going off in the right direction. Is this the best path to travel to solve the problem that we've been presented with? And once you feel pretty confident that you think you're on the right path, you spend the rest of the time just trying to make sure that you design that thing right. So we're designing the right thing, and then we're designing the thing right. Right thing right. Right thing right. Okay, I'm going to shift myself over here. Now, next up, observation. Observation can either be deliberate, and it can be a thoughtful creation of the circumstances where you see these things, but you could also just see things in the wild. And sometimes it just may be something in between. But ideally, at this observation stage, this is where you're going to define your challenge. You're going to try and take a moment, and rather than just think about the what, because I think that fundraisers are pretty good at thinking about the what. I'll give you all the benefit of the doubt, granted, that you're probably thinking about how many new donors you want, the response rates you'd like to see, the ROI that you'd like to be able to show. But what I'm considering is that you take into account the why and the how right alongside your what. So your why and your how could be building loyalty. We want to tell better stories. We want to provide a better engagement experience. And the difference between these two can look like a what focused challenge is we need to increase response rates. But a why and how focused challenge might look like we need to tell better stories. And then chances are a great challenge is going to look like bringing those two worlds together. Maybe something like we need to tell better stories because our donors respond well to their community coming to life in an email. You're going to want to determine a sample and an audience at some stage. if you've observed something in the wild, which might mean you had a golf tournament and you're hanging out by the ball washer and someone mentioned something that fired a synapse in your brain and you thought, oh man, Jane, I never thought of it like that. That is something that is going to maybe trigger you realizing that you need to find 5 Janes and you need to put them in the room and you need to have very thoughtful conversations with them, or you need to have 5 phone calls with 5 Janes. You're thinking very carefully about who your audience is and why. And it's those outliers, those people on the margins of our bell curve, who are going to give you some of that really cool stuff, that stuff that's a little strange. And once you have those people, what you might be listening for are stories. You want to listen for things like, what are their values? What's important to them? Their aspirations, their behaviors, their attributes. These are not going to be directly linked to their giving behavior immediately or ever. But what they might do is they're going to help you see and paint a picture of a persona, of an audience in Technicolor, rather than black and white, rather than the give, no give binary distinctions. Now you've got a world of opportunity here in front of you that is really going to be the stuff that I think personally is going to help set your program apart, your campaign apart, and your appeal apart, and help you resonate, your message resonate with donors in a way that may not have been before and that few other charities do. Now you're going to start to synthesize this together. You're going to start to take some of those raw data that you have, some of those observations, and you're going to start to try and massage them into insights, which are some interpretations. And ideally, you want to get to a point where you have something that is actionable. That's what's going to get you to the next corner of this circle, is you're going to have something that's a little more actionable. And now let's say you are a hospital foundation and you're about to launch a whole new campaign for new digital technology. It's going to be an AI-powered hospital. You did an appeal and it bombed. You could look at it in a strictly quantitative way where people gave, people didn't. Fewer people gave than usual, therefore it bombed. Therefore we should never talk about the hospital again, the digital version of the hospital again. But actually, digging a little deeper and having some more insights into your audience might tell you things like donors are less motivated to support the technology if it's not anchored with a human story. And now you start to combine those things, massage them a little bit, and you get to, I think, a pretty actionable challenge, which might be, how might we, design thinking loves those 3 words, how might we? How might we help donors see the benefits of technology in ways that motivates them to give? Okay, we're turning the corner. I'm at my time, 3:30. So I'm probably about 5 minutes behind where I'd like to be. So I'm gonna make sure we keep this trucking along. Idea generation. I mean, we're talking brainstorms here, people. I'm gonna be real with you. We're talking brainstorms. Bye, Lorraine. We're talking about brainstorms on steroids. And here I'm going to give you 5 quick tips about what I think are some great opportunities to make sure that if you've got an hour with a room of thoughtful, interesting people and you have insights to glean from them, here's 5 tips. 1, prepare a good brief. Put another way, it's build a great sandbox for them to play in. By that, I just mean they should be able to have a ton of fun inside that sandbox, but they should also know exactly where the bounds are, and that when they leave the sandbox, they've gone out of bounds. Don't think of this as a negative of putting them in a box. Think of it as just giving them very clear boundaries where they can be most productive and offer the most value. If you've ever been in a brainstorm, you've probably seen some groupthink in action. You've all been in brainstorms. Sorry, I shouldn't have even suggested that. You've all been in brainstorms, and you've probably all seen groupthink happen where one person has a good idea and it's like, boop, boop, see you later, great, job done. What I would suggest that if you're facilitating and someone has a great idea, if you want to keep conversation flowing, you can honor how great that was and say, let's put a pin in that. And how about we consider something that is the opposite? This is kind of like when Homer Simpson, I think it was Homer Simpson, catches Bart smoking. You know, you could do an anti-smoking campaign if you want people to stop smoking, or you could make them smoke so many cigarettes they get sick and never want to smoke again. Like that's a bad idea, but by like pushing people over to this whole other opposite, you're going to kind of take their brain to a new place, and then they might come back to the middle as opposed to going all the way back to the other side. So consider opposites. Like, oh, we should make it red. Amazing. I like red. We all like red. But what if it was blue? Prepare some what if questions and some probing questions. There's nothing wrong with having those in your back pocket. A good moderator should have those ready to go. Thanks, Anne. Verifying it was Homer and Bart. Buy some Post-it notes. You know, this is maybe this little tip here has aged itself, but if you are in a room together, buy some Post-it notes. But if you're online and you're using something like Miro or another virtual whiteboarding, there are virtual Post-it notes. So that maybe the COVID version of this is just make sure you know how to post a virtual Post-it note. And bring in fresh eyes. Bring in a volunteer. Bring in a board member if they're that engaged. Maybe even bring a donor. Create a shocking idea that you might bring a donor into a fundraising planning session, but I think that there's a good opportunity to bring those people in. It'll put some people on their best behavior who maybe would not have been on their best behavior otherwise, and I think that you could get some really rich insights and data from those fresh ideas. You got a bunch of ideas now. You got observations, you've got insights, you've got ideas, you got Post-it notes galore. You need to figure out how to graduate the best ideas forward to make sure that you're going to be building the right thing. So how do you figure out what is the best idea? Here are just a few questions. Does it make sense for our brand? Is it viable within our budget? Is it something donors would want? Is this logistically and technically possible? I would add legally. Just don't break the law just because it's a good idea. And does it address our original challenge? One of my favorite ideas, I tell this to anyone who will listen, I'm telling it to all of you now, is I had an idea for a food bank client that they should just mail cans of tuna to people, because I mean, every direct mail was encouraging people to donate food to their local food bank. And for the same amount of money, we could just send them a can of tuna and then they could just donate that. I mean, in worst case, they just eat the tuna and we're feeding people. Still like that idea, guys. All right, back on track. Oh, by the way, yeah, you can't mail a can of tuna. I'm pretty sure. You can't put a stamp on it. Prototyping. This is a fun part. Prototyping is a lot of fun. This is where you're going to get these early rough representations of an idea, and it just has to be like just enough that a person can react to it. And don't underestimate people's imagination. I was in Banff taking a course on design thinking, and we had this, I'll save you some of the detail, but we had this like kit of things, and so we faked all the things that were in the kit. One of the fake things in the kit was bear spray, which was just a cardboard toilet paper roll that said bear spray on it. And the way people pulled it out of that box when we started showing it to strangers and looking at it, you would think we actually gave them bear spray. Like they would sort of look at all sides of it to see if it was really bear spray. Don't underestimate people's ability to play along and be honest in the process. Oh, Connie, we could do something together. We can mail things. Let's mail a banana. How might a fundraiser prototype? Oh, pineapples. An outer envelope and an insert mock-up. Guys, you don't necessarily, I'm telling you right now, I'm letting in on a secret, and I'm sorry to my friends who work in direct mail agencies, you don't necessarily have to pay hundreds of dollars to see what an envelope mock-up might look like. You've all got pens, you all got paper. oh, no alcohol. You can mock up something with a pen and a paper, and you can start to see how it looks. And what you're not going to get is like response rate data, but you're going to get some interesting feedback from people, and you're going to be putting something into their hand. You can fake a website or a landing page in PowerPoint. I did this in a different version of this presentation. I had a few case studies. I dropped one from this, but it was one where I had a focus group. I faked a website by using PowerPoint. I had a big get started button on it. I said, people, what do you think when we click that get started button, what do you think is behind it? And they told me what they think would be behind it. There's nothing behind it. It's just a PowerPoint presentation. Those became the things I built because I wanted to build something that did what people expected it to do. I want to make sure that I didn't build a Norman door that has a handle on it, and when you pull it, you get pissed off because you're supposed to push it. Moving along, testing. This is where we go. We're doing it. This is where we go live. And if we were doing traditional linear project management, this is your finish line. In a circular model, though, in this design thinking model, we're running around this merry-go-round of testing, observing, idea generation, prototyping, and doing it again. We are on a journey, team, all of us together. If you're going to try this, and please, I think you should try and find a place to try it. We're on a journey. It's not a race. Then you do it all over again, like again and again and again. Repeat. Okay, look at us. That was my crash course in design thinking. I'm going to take a sip of water. We just did this whole thing. You've got download of the slides, which, this is I hope I've captured this on one slide for you. So if you're curious about this, or if you ever want to try it, here's a slide that you could print out or screenshot, and you can have it handy, and you can see that when somebody asks you, what is design thinking? I feel like at least one of you said that you have no idea what it is. And I think it was either Sam or Mel. Now you know. Here we go, guys. Now we know, and here it is on one sheet of paper. And but there's a but. Design thinking is not by any means perfect. Clearly, I'm a fan. I would not be here doing this presentation for you if I wasn't a fan. However, in recent years, because it is not a new idea, so as time has passed, people have compared it to syphilis. People have said that it is not inclusive. People have said that it actually maintains the status quo. And there has been quite a bit of really, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Like warranted and valuable and productive debate about the merits of design thinking and how far it can or cannot go. What's the difference between A/B testing and design thinking, Nancy? Short version, so that we stay on time, is that A/B testing is absolutely something that could be incorporated into either methodology. I think that's during your testing phase of design thinking is where you could put in an A/B test. I would say it's how you get to the point of knowing what A/B tests you want to do is where there's a difference to be struck. So, for example, are you A/B testing because traditionally one has worked and traditionally the other? Like what are the things you're testing, I suppose, are what I'm trying to say, could be quite different in a design thinking methodology where you're trying to maybe test something that was derived from a qualitative insight rather than a quantitative insight. But I'm making a big leap of logic there, Nancy. I'll be really honest that, I mean, you said A/B testing and my mind went to direct mail, but that I could be thinking about something totally different. Why don't we chat more about that at the end if there's interest around it. Okay, I was talking about how design thinking is not perfect. And there has been thought and work by some people much smarter than I that have tried to consider the shortcomings of design thinking, and especially in the area of social justice, equity, equality, diversity. The Stanford Design School, they have spent a lot of time on this. They've built a lot of thoughtful, diverse coalitions in this space. And a recommendation they make that I like is that anchoring all that we do on the outside, all that we do in the observation and the idea generation and the prototyping, be anchored by a regular and ongoing practice of noticing and reflecting. And now, what does that mean? So noticing becomes a moment to pause. I believe the D School, the liberatory design team, they call these equity pauses. So an equity pause can be an opportunity consistently throughout, several times throughout, to acknowledge what power is at play, what power do you bring, what power is at the table, and what power is not at the table. The identities in the discussion, the context of a discussion and an ideation and a prototyping. And it can be a reveal. You know, it's an opportunity. Every equity pause throughout this process is an opportunity to try and reveal your authentic self or an authentic self. And these are opportunities to try and maybe liberate new ideas, to bring in new perspectives and new discussions that you wouldn't have otherwise been having, to try and notice things like the identities at play, the power at play. And then to all of this, to that last point on there, is to try and return ourselves to an intention of designing in a way that generates increased equity. What that will look like is there's as many ways to answer that as there are ways to implement it. But I think I highly recommend that this be part of your practice. It's also an opportunity to reflect. It's a chance to notice emotions, actions, insights, the impacts that you're having, the discussion is having, what might be missing, to also share in the learning, and to look for opportunities to co-design. Who may not be included in this process, who needs to be included in this process, maybe who from the community you serve, the people you support, the people you would like to be actively involved in the process. By having equity pauses throughout to notice and reflect throughout, you certainly improve your ability to design a more thoughtful, equitable product. Okay, I'm going to hop into a case study now. I think I've pulled myself back on track. Okay, so when I was a war child, this was my design challenge I had. And maybe some of you can relate to this a bit. It was, how might we recognize the legacy donors, who I just think like they're the best? How might we, war child, recognize the legacy donors that have included us in our estate, or in their estate, I'm sorry. Sneak peek, or spoiler, I suppose. Spoiler alert. This was the answer. I'm giving you the answer first because I think it looks pretty cool. And if it keeps you engaged for the next 5 minutes, job accomplished. Here are some of the things we observed in this process. So we're talking about the first corner of this circle. We had some really in-depth conversations with living intenders. So intenders being people who have have put us in their will already. So we know they're in the will. War Child had never done this before. It was a young organization in a lot of respects, and in the fundraising program, part of my job was just getting these things from 0 to 2 on a scale of 0 to 10. So we had actual conversations with actual people who had put us in their will, and that was a little shocking, I think, to some people in the organization, that we would dare pick up the phone and talk to them. These legacy intenders, what we learned is that they really, really value personal expressions of gratitude rather than public. Now, if they wanted to give anonymously, I probably wouldn't have had their phone number to give them a call. So these were not anonymous donors. And none of the people we talked to said, leave me alone. None of them said, I don't want to be acknowledged. Everybody was very happy to have the conversation and to discuss how they might be acknowledged, because it is a gift after all. But what we found is that they were not interested in having stuff named after them, having their events where we honor them publicly. So we needed to try and figure out a way of how can we really give them something that's meaningful, but that is not a public, visible expression to the public, expression of gratitude. And intentionally, we looked outside the nonprofit sector, because I found all I could find in the nonprofit sector was pins, lapel pins, events, names engraved on walls, plaques. So we made a challenge coin. Now, I'm not sure if any of you have background or to know what a coin is, a challenge coin is. And but what I suspect is that there are people who are like nodding your head right now. You know exactly what a challenge coin is. And there are people who have no idea what a challenge coin is, because it's like you're in one camp or the other, you know, or you don't know. And the very, very short version of what it is that in the armed services, there is a tradition amongst personnel to create a coin for a group of people who went through some crap together, who like really they crossed a threshold together in some way. And what it absolutely is not is a rank or like a mark on a lapel. It is not a formal acknowledgement. This is Jane Doe making in PowerPoint a picture and sending it to a company, and there are lots of companies that do this, a coin that they then that troop or this group of people went through. And so there are challenge coins for people who went to the moon on the Apollo 11 mission. So there's like 4 of those. Every US president has their own challenge coin that they hand to people. And the way they hand off to people is they do it as a handshake. So kind of like slipping a bribe. You put the coin in the hand, shake hands, little twisteroo, and the person has their coin. So it is a like very one-to-one. That's the whole point of it. There are US presidents past, often in their like presidential portrait in the background. I think Bill Clinton's definitely, there's a little like rack way back here of like challenge coins that if you don't know what a challenge coin is, you'd never see it. You'd never even know it was there. But if you're a person who knows what it is and you see it, you know what it is, and it sends a very clear message of this is a president who supports what I do. So we decided to make our own challenge coin, and as far as I know, I never really at the time could find another charity that was using challenge coins, and definitely not in this way. And so like a good coin, I went down a whole coin wormhole. A good coin is kind of symbolic and weird. Like a good coin shouldn't just say, thank you for putting us in your will. You know, we've got beavers and caribou and boats on ours instead of when you could just have a 5, a 10, and a 25. Coins carry symbolism. So what we put in there is War Child had these 3 pillars of education, opportunity, and justice. And so we've got the pencil represents education, the constellations represent opportunity because they act as a compass, but also stars. I'm sure you all know, stars died long before their light reached Earth. So just like a gift and a will after a person has passed, it powers an organization after they're gone. Similar to the stars. We created this box. We prototyped this box. I made it at my kitchen table. I took my wife's ring box. She's not impressed. The ring that I gave my wife her wedding ring in, I took it. I made a mold out of it from silicone rubber that I bought on Amazon for $50. I built a little like hole for it out of my kid's Lego, and I bought concrete patch from Home Depot. I found out that concrete patch would be better than just concrete because it's got some like polymers in it. I used my own electric toothbrush to jiggle the bubbles out. And I made a whole bunch of these at my kitchen table, all sorts of different versions of it. And then I brought them to the office and I just put them in people's hands like you should with a good prototype. I just put them in people's hands and you see how they react to it. And some people go, oh, they're going to break it. And then some people say like, oh, this feels nice. And you get to see how they look. And why concrete, briefly. We chose to make it out of concrete because concrete is a building material and it builds the foundation of our homes, our hopes, and our dreams sometimes literally get built on top of concrete. And so we wanted to encase this powerful symbol of gratitude inside a symbol of resilience and strength and foundation. So we made a box. The one on the left of this, the very like clean corners one, that's my wife's ring box. The one on the right, I didn't make. So an artist, the artist who designed, pro bono, designed the coin for us. He liked his box better. So, oh, thanks, Connie. I kept a couple because I'm so proud of them. And if you're wondering, because there's not going to be a slide about this in terms of cost, so I probably put $75 into the box making because I did it myself. I went on Etsy and saw that you can buy concrete ring boxes. It's a very trendy thing. I think I might have hit that trend a little early, and maybe could have had a little side business there, but I didn't. They started like $100. And so for $100, I was able to buy enough material to make 15 of them. And I don't work at Warchild anymore, but somewhere there's written instructions and the silicone mold and a big bucket of concrete waiting for the next person to make one. So that cost about 50, maybe $100 for all those materials to make about 30 boxes if necessary. And the coin, I was able to find a third-party vendor who their minimum order was 50 coins. Warchild, because this was brand new, this is a first for them. I only ordered 50 coins and I think it was about a $150 setup fee and then about $250 for the 50 coins. So that's around like the $4 a coin mark. So a lot of work, a lot of thought, but I spent far less than $1,000 on this, even when you start to account for the bubble wrap and the sending it out to people. And the response was great. You take a sip of water. I think we're just about there, team. I feel like we just went through something together. One more sip. So what do I want you to take away from this? Design thinking can be your Swiss Army knife. It's not your hammer. You're not going to build a house. You're not going to write a 5-year strategy by design thinking. But there are some things you can do, like keep it close. Excuse me. Keep it close. Keep it in your pocket. Keep it sharp. Read a couple books. Read a couple articles. Share it with your friends like I'm doing right now. Be adventurous. Fix things. Yeah. I think that you can fix things with design thinking. And here we are. Thank you all so much for the engagement that I'm seeing here on the side. I really appreciate that. That was nice of you. It could have been 4 of us here for all I know, and that's perfectly fine. I enjoyed it. Mel, I see you there. I'm going to take a sip of water.
Hello, yes. There's been a few questions coming in. First of all, thank you so much. I honestly feel like I am now an expert in design thinking, so thank you. That was absolutely fantastic and so engaging. I've never seen a presentation like that before, so you were awesome. All right, so our first question comes from an anonymous. Our organization has had great success doing what we're doing, But this has resulted in a culture of complacency. They're saying that they were doing conventional fundraising. How do we encourage leadership to invest in unconventional ideas? Great question.
Yeah, great question. I don't think the right approach, or I don't think the design thinking approach would be to propose something huge if that's what you're hoping to be able to do. I think you start very small and you start with the people who are on your side and you gather some data and you go a little further, which are each turns around the circle, right? Like you just keep going around and around and it gets a little bigger and it gets a little bigger, and pick your shots, you know, look for the converted and start to build up your base of evidence there. And before you know it, like you might actually challenge the status quo. In for-profit world, that could look like challenger brands. Like Simply Financial is actually just owned by CIBC, I think. But these little sub-brands are incubators for knowledge gathering. And the mothership is going to keep doing what the mothership does. But you, anonymous, can be the Simply Financial that tries out cool stuff and shoots that information up to the mothership, and piece by piece. I hope that helps.
Bless you. Bless you. Yeah, thank you. That was great. Next question coming from Laura. Can you talk a little more about how design thinking and data-driven thinking work together, if at all?
Qualitative data is data. Data-driven strategy, decision-making, can sometimes be conflated with solely quantitative decision-making. And if you're feeling that pressure to be a data-driven fundraiser, but what you're actually being asked to do is to find and provide quantitative data, then I recommend you try to push back a little bit and find a balance between the two, to find a place, a time and a place that's appropriate for qualitative data, for some of the softer, the emotion to come into those data decisions. And I would also say that no data is data, and which is at odds with the idea of you make decisions based on data. That, to say that has a baked in assumption that there is something there to look at, and sometimes not having something to look at is data. And what do you do when you have nothing to look at? Then maybe qualitative might be your best opportunity. Conversations, focus group surveys, those might be your best inroads.
Thank you, Brock. All right, we have a couple more questions coming in. Dave says, would you say that design thinking is scalable and can be used for most projects, from organizations restructuring to new product services to revamping existing services or products?
I'm gonna hedge my bets and say I'm not 100% sure. I think it has its limits for scalability, for sure. Personal experience in this, most of this, well, the methodology, I'm parroting back to you, the methodology, that's pretty well established. My experience has been more on specific projects, specific opportunities, specific value propositions. It has not been on trying to apply design thinking to big, like restructuring departments, defining multi-year strategies. I think if nothing else, there are some practices in like the idea generation phase and the observation phase where you're trying to bring in a diversity of voices and experiences and skill sets and lived experiences that can and should scale to bring those in, because I have seen examples of strategies that are sometimes disconnected from lived experiences that need to be included in the decision-making process. Lived experiences could just mean, it could mean people of color, it could mean people of different communities, people of different geographic areas across Canada. But it could also mean bring in the people who do the work, people who are in the database. You know, if you have a 5-year strategy plan written by 4 members of an SMT that have never logged into the database before, it will have blind spots, and potentially very big blind spots around IT infrastructure, data strategy, donor engagement, if it's not informed by any of that practice.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have time for maybe one more question. This one's coming from an anonymous. What would be a good first step to starting to incorporate design thinking into our busy days? Great question.
Look at the low-hanging fruit, the project that's been kind of hanging out near the bottom of your to-do list that you always hope you're going to get there, but you never quite do. The opportunity to take a new approach to that project might make it a lot more interesting and bring it up to the top of your priority list. And I would also say, what has worked for me is find the project where you're going to have as long a leash as possible, like as much where you can fly under the radar. Like if you're doing this for the first time, and the challenge coin is a very good example of this, is I knew what my budget was, which was $1,000, and I knew what some of my expectations of my role were, which was to establish a framework for legacy acquisition, retention, and stewardship. And nobody really cared exactly how I did it. So that was kind of was a fertile ground to approach the problem in any way I wanted. And this was the way I wanted to approach it. So you might need to start very small, and there's nothing wrong with starting small. This coin was a small thing, but now I've met people who said, hey, you're the coin guy. You're that guy who made the coin. I heard you made a coin. So you never know.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brock. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you also attached some resources to these slide decks as well. If anyone wants to learn more about design thinking, you'll be receiving the slides. Yeah, there it is. You'll be receiving the slides after this. So if you wanted to learn more, there you go. And I think we will end it here if there's no more questions. So thanks again, Brock. That was absolutely fantastic and jammed. Oh, Beth says the catch up. You're right.
Oh, yeah.
Let's
okay.
talk about catch up.
Can you still hear me?
We can.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So for you, for those of you hanger-oners, there's a book called The Diversity Bonus by Scott Page, who's a mathematician at the University of Michigan, who basically tried to find out and test this pervasive myth of diversity equaling lowering the bar, which is a myth. And so he tried to take a mathematician's approach, and he found that the more diverse teams really do achieve better outcomes in the end. And the very dumbed down version that I've never been able to shake from my mind is that there are people who keep their ketchup in the fridge, and there's people who keep their ketchup in the cupboard. And you want both on your team. Because if you have all fridge people on your team and you run out of ketchup, then your only options are the things that are ketchup adjacent. So like mayonnaise, which is disgusting, but some monsters eat mayonnaise with their fries. But if you're in the cupboard and you run out of that, your ketchup, if you're a cupboard person, then you've got like malt vinegar, you've got other options. So you want to have a diversity of lived experience on your team because it provides you the diversity of problem solving pathways, and organizations that of any kind that fail to have a diversity of lived experience at the table are missing out on the multitudes, the magnitudes of problem solving approaches and ideas and insights that can help overcome those problems. That's as short as I can make it. Is that interesting?
Love that. Very interesting. And now I'm craving some fries. So thank you.
You're welcome. No problem.
All right. Well, if you are feeling inspired, have any further questions for Brock, or just want to keep the conversation going, I invite you to check out our Donor Experience Week community forum. So Sam has actually just posted that into the chat. Reminder that when this session ends, there will be a quick survey. We'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm sure Brock would too. Always looking to improve our presentations. Otherwise, I just wanted to give you all a big thank you for tuning in to this action-packed week of learnings. It has been an absolute pleasure getting to know all of you, for interacting with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Brock, it has been such a great time having you close this all off. And you know what? I'm going to pass it off to you, put the pressure on you, and let you say any final last words for everyone.
Oh, stay curious, people. Stay hungry, stay curious. That's what I'm going to say.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a fabulous weekend, and we'll see you at next year's Donor Experience Week. Take care.
Bye, everybody.